Ladies and gentlemen, Marco Rubio said something we're supposed to believe is outrageous.
America is still a young nation measured against the record of history. And from the beginning, we have carried the belief that our country represents something new in the world. But the soul of our nation has always been rooted in an ancient faith.
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and that was our Secretary of State delivering remarks at a national prayer festival on the National Mall, part of a series of events commemorating the nation's 250th birthday. Now, Rubio, as well as J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth, delivered remarks underlying the Christian foundations of America, which caused agita in the usual sectors of the media. Here's the New York Times. Trump administration pushes narrative of Christian founding at rally. If you can't tell, that's kind of a headline with a disapproving tone. Then there was this from CNN: National Mall prayer event sparks concern about Trump administration eroding the wall between church and state. And here's the headline of a USA Today opinion piece: Rededicate 250, focus on evangelical Christians is un-American. So what's going on here? Are we a Christian nation? Well, I think the answer is clearly yes, depending on how you mean that. To get a little more sense of what we're talking about, let's go to a nice clip also from J.D. Vance.
And the morality and religion that formed the American consciousness were decidedly Christian, founded upon the principles and the divinity of Jesus Christ.
That's very well said. Now, it matters a lot what you mean, of course, when you say we're a Christian nation. If you mean we're a Christian theocracy, obviously we're not. If you mean instead that our country wouldn't be what it is today if it hadn't been settled and founded by Christians, if Christian notions hadn't suffused so much of our early history and our early founding documents and our subsequent history, that's obviously true. People who settled here from Holland and England initially, they came here to start a godly community or godly communities, right? John Winthrop, one of the most honored early American colonists, gives this famous City on a Hill sermon, has echoed all the way down through American history. Prior to departing for our shores, there's something like 30 quotes from the Bible in there, dozens of other biblical references. The Mayflower Compact, one of our most important early documents, multiple references to God and to Christianity there. Now there's a notion in the popular imagination like, okay, that was Christian, but then the revolution happened and that was just a secular event. It was forged by these founding fathers who were deists or agnostics, and that's not true. By the way, one of the most important groups of people who are making the case for the revolution at the time was preachers. There was no tension between Christianity and the case for the revolution. The latter depended very often on the former, nor was there tension between the Christian faith and a belief. Consider Jonathan Mayhew, a Boston pastor. In 1766, he preached upon the repeal of the Stamp Act. He said that we had learned from the Holy Scriptures that wise, brave, and virtuous men were always friends to liberty, that God gave the Israelites a kingdom or absolute monarch in his anger, because they had not sense and virtue enough to like a free commonwealth and to have himself for their king, that the Son of God came down from heaven to make us free indeed, and that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Now, that was very typical. Every Sunday, you had preachers up there in the pulpit quoting Exodus, Judges, the Psalms to make the case for American liberty. And it wasn't just religious figures. Patrick Henry, his famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, biblical references throughout the whole thing. Thomas Paine, the incredibly influential author of Common Sense, later would become a notorious deist and be scorned for a deist tract he wrote. If you read Common Sense, biblical references throughout that as well. The fact of the matter is that American liberalism in the best sense, our belief in liberty, is grounded in religion. You don't need to go any further than the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, right? That says we're all created equal and we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Well, where does that come from, right? That's a core tenet of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And as for religious liberty, has the same roots, the belief in inherent and equal human dignity and the rights of conscience. And then there's the matter that the founding fathers believed we didn't need an establishment of religion as a practical matter because we had something else called the Bible. I wrote about this not too long ago in a review of a book by a scholar named Mark Knoll on the history of the Bible in America. American printers produced 1,023 editions of the Bible from 1801 through 1840. Tellingly, from 1794 to 1815, printers published 186 novels and 246 editions of the Bible. Almost all of them were the King James Version. The American Bible Society was founded in 1860 and began the production and distribution of the Bible on an industrial scale. In 1830, the country had about 2 million total households, and the society printed 786,000 Bibles in the 3 years from 1829 to 1831 alone. In a number of states, auxiliaries reported delivering Bibles to every household that didn't yet have one. The common schools or tax-supported public schools did their part by making Bible readings part of the curricula. The belief was that the King James Bible is non-sectarian, a historic part of the American project, and a pillar of morality. As a mid-19th century Massachusetts legal decision put it, the Bible was, quote, the best book, end quote, to inculcate the, quote, virtues which are the ornaments of human society and the basis upon which a republican constitution is founded. Now, what about the founders themselves? Now, some of them weren't conventionally religious men, but they were overwhelmingly religious. Jefferson famously a deist, but that doesn't mean they all were deists. George Washington was an Anglican. Now, the New York Times criticized Pete Hegseth and called him out for saying this, invoking this image of George Washington at Valley Forge.
Valley Forge, one hangs in my office. Kneeling in the deep snow, his hat and sword nearby. Washington bows his head. Amid all the bleak nights, the loss and despair, the lack of proper support, George Washington performed a profound act. He prayed.
Now, Hegseth was referring to this painting. We've all seen this image, very evocative. Now, the New York Times basically says that image is based on a myth, and it's true. We don't know whether that exact tableau happened, if he was in his knees in the snow beside his horse, but we do know that Washington talked about providence all the time. And here's this item from a very subtle and nuanced take on Washington's religiosity from Mount Vernon. Washington is reported to have had regular private prayer sessions, and personal prayer was a large part of his life. One well-known report stated that Washington's nephew witnessed him doing personal devotions with an open Bible while kneeling in both the morning and evening. Here's a prayer that Washington circulated in 1783. I now make it my earnest prayer that God would have the United States in his holy protection, that he would incline the hearts of the citizens to cultivate a spirit of subordination and obedience to government, to entertain a brotherly affection and love for one another, for their fellow citizens of the United States at large, and particularly for their brethren who have served in the field, and finally, that he would most graciously be pleased to dispose of us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, and without an humble imitation of whose example in these things we could never hope to be a happy nation. Amen. In his farewell address after his second term as president, Washington famously says that religion and morality are indispensable supports for the habits necessary for the success of self-government. So I could go on, but please do not tell me it's somehow a violation of the separation of church and state to notice these things. It's not establishing a religion to acknowledge how important Christianity has been to our nation. Now, that doesn't mean, obviously, that we're not open to people of all faiths or no faith whatsoever. But again, it's Christianity that formed the moral and intellectual basis for the creation and recognition in our system of government of those rights. And by the way, it really tells you all you need to know that this National Prayer Festival on the Mall that freaked out so many people was to mark the 250th anniversary of the Second Continental Congress, calling for a national day of fasting and prayer to petition God to protect the peace and freedom of this nation, something we should do every single day. Hey, do yourself a favor, comment, like, subscribe. I guarantee you, you won't regret it. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.